Hi, I'm Victoria. The sound of splintering wood still haunts me. One moment, my daughter Sophie was practicing Vivaldi's Four Seasons on her great-grandmother's 1920s German violin. And the next, Caroline was standing over the shattered remains, her designer heels grinding the delicate spruce into the Persian rug. Maybe now she'll focus on something more realistic, my sister said, brushing wood dust from her manicured fingers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Kennedy Center audition was in 3 days. Sophie had been preparing for 18 months. When I called our father, General Robert Hayes, Defense Secretary of the United States, expecting support, expecting justice, his response chilled me more than the December wind rattling our Fairfax townhouse windows. Victoria, you've always been overly dramatic about these artistic pursuits. Caroline was just being practical. That's when I discovered the first unauthorized withdrawal from Sophie's college fund. $25,000. Gone. They thought crushing my daughter's dreams would silence us both. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. The morning of December 15th started like any other Saturday in our quiet Fairfax neighborhood. Sophie was upstairs in her practice room, the converted guest bedroom where we'd installed soundproofing after the neighbors complained about her 4-hour daily sessions. The notes of Bach's Partita in D minor floated through the house, each phrase executed with the precision that had earned her recognition from every music teacher she'd ever studied under. At 15, Sophie possessed something rare, a combination of technical mastery and emotional depth that made seasoned musicians stop mid-conversation when she played. I was in the kitchen, reviewing client portfolios for Monday's meetings at Morrison Financial Group, where I'd built a reputation as one of their most trusted advisors. The coffee was still hot, the morning sun streamed through the bay window, and everything felt perfectly ordinary. That's how deception works, isn't it? It masquerades as normalcy until the moment it reveals its true face. The doorbell rang at exactly 9:30. I glanced through the peephole and saw Caroline's silver Lexus in the driveway, gleaming despite the frost that covered everything else. My sister stood on the porch wearing a cream-colored wool coat that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her auburn hair styled in that effortless way that required an hour at the salon. Behind her stood Patricia, our mother, clutching her ever-present leather handbag like a shield. "Surprise visit," Caroline announced when I opened the door, though her smile never reached her eyes. Mother wanted to hear Sophie practice before the big audition. Patricia brushed past me without waiting for an invitation, her perfume a cloud of expensive florals that seemed to fill every corner of the entryway. "Where is my granddaughter? I've been telling everyone at the country club about her Kennedy Center audition. Such an honor." Caroline followed, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors as she surveyed the living room. "Cozy," she said, though her tone suggested anything but admiration. "Very modest." Sophie appeared at the top of the stairs, violin case in hand, her face lighting up at the sight of her grandmother. "Grandma Patricia!" I was just about to run through my audition pieces one more time. "Would you like to hear?" "Of course, darling," Patricia said, settling into the wingback chair by the fireplace. "Play that lovely piece you performed at your spring recital. The one that made Mrs. Henderson cry." "Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto in E minor," Sophie said, her excitement palpable. "But I've been working on something even more challenging for the audition. Ms. Rodriguez says it's ambitious, but she thinks I can handle it." Caroline perched on the edge of the sofa, examining her nails. "Ms. Rodriguez is the music teacher, I assume, the one filling Sophie's head with unrealistic expectations?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. I moved closer to Sophie, an instinctive protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed by my sister. "Elena Rodriguez is one of the most respected violin instructors on the East Coast," I said carefully. "She's prepared students for Juilliard Curtis New England Conservatory. Sophie is fortunate to study with her." "Fortunate," Caroline repeated, as if testing the word's taste. "Is that what we're calling it? Because from where I sit, it looks like you're setting this child up for devastating disappointment. Do you have any idea how competitive these music programs are?" How many talented young people audition and get rejected? Sophie's grip tightened on her violin case. I know it's competitive, Aunt Caroline. That's why I practice so much. Ms. Rodriguez says I have real potential. Potential doesn't pay bills, sweetheart, Caroline said, her voice taking on that condescending tone I remembered from childhood. Your mother never learned that lesson, and look where it got her. The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Patricia shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. This was Caroline's show, and our mother had always been content to let her eldest daughter take the lead in family matters. What exactly do you mean by that? I asked, though I could feel the familiar tightness in my chest that always accompanied confrontations with my family. Caroline stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced elegance. I mean that you've spent years indulging Sophie's hobby instead of preparing her for the real world. Music is lovely as an extracurricular activity, but building a life around it? That's a luxury most people can't afford. Sophie has already received interest from several prestigious programs, I said. The Kennedy Center audition is just one opportunity among many. Interest, Caroline laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Victoria, you've always lived in a fantasy world. Remember when you wanted to be a writer? You were going to change the world with your little stories. How did that work out? The old wound opened effortlessly. Caroline had a gift for finding exactly the right spot to press, the place where doubt lived and festered, despite years of therapy and self-affirmation. Yes, I had wanted to be a writer once. Yes, I had chosen financial stability over artistic dreams when Sophie was born. But that sacrifice had given my daughter opportunities I never had. Things are different now, I said quietly. Sophie has talent that deserves to be nurtured. Talent? Caroline repeated, shaking her head. Do you know what I told Robert when he asked about Sophie's college plans? I told him that his granddaughter was being raised to believe she could make a living playing violin. He laughed, Victoria. Our father, the defense secretary, actually laughed at the idea. Sophie's face had gone pale. She set her violin case down on the coffee table with trembling hands. Dad laughed. Patricia finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Caroline, perhaps we should... Should what, Mother? Continue pretending that this delusion is healthy? Sophie is 15 years old. She should be focusing on academics, on practical skills that will serve her in the real world. Instead, she spends 4 hours a day playing an instrument that will never support her. Music has supported many people throughout history, I said, fighting to keep my voice level. The National Youth Orchestra scholarship alone would cover her entire college tuition. Carolyn's expression shifted, becoming predatory. Scholarship? You mean the one with a less than 2% acceptance rate? Victoria, you're setting this child up for heartbreak. And for what? So you can live vicariously through her artistic dreams? The accusation hit like a physical blow. Sophie looked between us, confusion and hurt warring across her face. This was exactly what I had tried to protect her from, the kind of psychological warfare that my family specialized in. I think you should leave, I said. Leave? Caroline's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. But Sophie was going to play for us. Weren't you, sweetheart? Show Grandma Patricia and Aunt Caroline what you've been working so hard on. Sophie glanced at me, seeking permission or perhaps protection. I nodded reluctantly. Maybe if they heard her play, they would understand. Maybe the music would speak louder than their prejudices. Sophie opened her case with reverent care, revealing the violin that had been in our family for 3 generations. The instrument was beautiful, its amber varnish glowing in the morning light, the delicate inlay work along the edges a testament to the craftsman who had created it nearly a century ago. Sophie's great-grandmother had been a concert violinist in Germany before the war changed everything. The violin was the only thing she had managed to save when she fled to America. Tell us about the piece you're playing, Patricia said, settling back in her chair with genuine interest. It's Vivaldi's 4 Seasons, specifically winter, Sophie said, positioning the violin under her chin with practiced ease. Ms. Rodriguez chose it because it showcases both technical skill and emotional interpretation. The piece tells a story about surviving harsh conditions and finding beauty even in difficult circumstances. Caroline's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. How appropriate. Sophie began to play, and the room transformed. The first notes were tentative, but as she settled into the familiar piece, her confidence grew. The music flowed from the instrument like water from a spring, each phrase building on the last, creating a narrative that needed no words. This was why I had made sacrifices, why I had chosen stability over dreams. Sophie possessed something precious, something that deserved protection and cultivation. As she moved into the more technically demanding passages, her bow work became a blur of precise motion. Her left hand danced across the fingerboard, finding each note with absolute accuracy. The music swelled and retreated, mimicking the fierce beauty of winter storms and the quiet peace that followed. Patricia's eyes had closed, and I could see tears gathering at the corners.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Even she, with all her practical concerns and social expectations, couldn't deny the power of what she was hearing. Caroline, however, watched with increasing agitation, her jaw clenched, her hands gripping her purse. Sophie reached the climactic passage, the moment where Vivaldi's composition demanded everything from the performer. Her bow flew across the strings, producing cascades of notes that seemed to fill not just the room but the entire house. This was artistry at its purest, talent that couldn't be taught or faked or dismissed. And that's when Caroline struck. She stood abruptly, startling Sophie in the middle of a delicate trill. The bow slipped, producing a harsh screech that shattered the musical spell. "Enough," Caroline said. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Look at her, completely lost in this fantasy world." "Sophie, what happens when you don't get into the National Youth Orchestra? What happens when you're competing against hundreds of other talented musicians and you realize that talent isn't enough?" Sophie lowered her violin, confusion and hurt written across her face. I know it's competitive, but Ms. Rodriguez thinks she can make money off your mother's delusions," Caroline interrupted. "How much are you paying for these lessons, Victoria? How much has this expensive hobby cost you over the years?" "Music education is an investment," I said, moving protectively toward Sophie. "An investment," Caroline laughed again. "In what? A career that doesn't exist?" "Sophie, darling, I want you to listen to me very carefully. The world is not a fairy tale. Success requires practical skills, not pretty performances." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "But I love playing. It makes me feel like I'm connected to something bigger than myself." "Feelings don't pay rent," Caroline said brutally. "Feelings don't secure your future. Your grandfather has offered to help with your college expenses, but only if you pursue something sensible. Pre-med, perhaps, or business. Something with actual prospects." "What if I don't want to be a doctor or a businesswoman?" Sophie asked, her voice barely audible. Caroline's expression softened in a way that somehow made her words more devastating. "Then you'll end up like your mother, scrambling to make ends meet, living in a modest little house in the suburbs, watching other people achieve the success you convinced yourself you didn't need." The cruelty was breathtaking in its precision. Caroline had managed to attack both Sophie and me with surgical accuracy, finding the exact fears that kept us awake at night. Was I holding my daughter back? Was I projecting my own unfulfilled dreams onto her talent? Sophie looked at me with wide, questioning eyes. "Mom, is Aunt Caroline right? Am I being unrealistic?" Before I could answer, Caroline reached for the violin. "May I see this? The famous family heirloom that's supposedly so valuable?" Sophie hesitated, glancing at me. I should have said no. I should have recognized the predatory gleam in my sister's eyes. Instead, I nodded, thinking that perhaps Caroline wanted to examine the instrument more closely, to understand its craftsmanship and history. Sophie carefully handed over the violin, her movements reverent and protective. The instrument looked fragile in Caroline's manicured hands, like a butterfly caught by someone who had never learned to appreciate beauty. "Beautiful workmanship," Caroline said, turning the violin over to examine the back. "Quite old, isn't it? I wonder how much it's actually worth in today's market." "It's not about monetary value," I said. "It's about family history, about connection to our past. Everything has monetary value, Victoria. That's how the real world works." Caroline held the violin up to the light, studying the varnish. "You know, Robert mentioned something interesting the other day. He said Sophie's college fund has been growing quite nicely, thanks to your financial planning skills." My blood turned to ice. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Well, it occurred to me that you might be making some questionable investment choices. Spending money on expensive music lessons instead of securing Sophie's practical future. Robert thinks it might be wise to have someone with more experience oversee these decisions." "The college fund is perfectly secure," I said, though warning bells were chiming in my head. "And the music lessons are paid for out of my personal income, not Sophie's savings." Caroline smiled, and in that smile I saw the trap that had been laid weeks or perhaps months ago. "Of course they are. I'm sure you've been very careful about that." She lifted the violin higher, as if admiring its construction in the morning light. Sophie watched anxiously, her hands unconsciously mimicking the protective position she used when cleaning the instrument. "You know what I think?" Caroline said conversationally. "I think this whole music obsession is a symptom of a larger problem. You've been living in a fantasy world for so long that you've lost touch with reality. And now you're dragging Sophie down with you." "That's not true," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Caroline had always been skilled at planting seeds of doubt, at making me question my own judgment. "Isn't it? Look at this house, Victoria. Look at your life. You're 42 years old, single, working a job that barely covers your expenses. Meanwhile, I'm married to a successful diplomat, living in a house that's been featured in Architectural Digest, and our children are enrolled in the most prestigious schools in the country." Patricia shifted uncomfortably, but remained silent. She had always deferred to Caroline's judgment, had always chosen the path of least resistance rather than standing up for what was right. "Success means different things to different people," I said weakly. "No, Victoria. Success means security. It means having options. It means not having to worry about whether you can afford your daughter's education." Caroline's grip on the violin shifted, becoming less careful. "Sophie deserves better than this small-town musician fantasy. She deserves the opportunities that come with practical choices." Sophie had begun to cry silently, tears streaming down her face as she watched her world crumble. The audition that had seemed so promising just minutes ago now felt like a distant dream. "Please give me back my violin," Sophie whispered. Caroline looked down at the instrument in her hands as if she had forgotten she was holding it. "Your violin? Sweetheart, this violin belongs to the family. It's been passed down through generations, and it will continue to be passed down to those who understand its true value." "Sophie understands its value," I said, stepping forward. "She's the one who's kept the musical tradition alive." "Has she? Or has she simply been indulging in an expensive hobby while her real future hangs in the balance?" Caroline's voice rose slightly, taking on the edge that I remembered from childhood arguments. "This instrument represents our family's heritage, not some teenage girl's artistic delusions. Give it back to her," I said firmly. Caroline's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "Or what, Victoria? You'll call our father? You'll run to Robert and tell him that his daughter is being mean to you? Just like when we were children?" The taunt hit its mark. How many times had I run to our father for protection, only to be told that I was overreacting, that Caroline was just being Caroline? How many times had I been made to apologize for standing up for myself? "This isn't about childhood games," I said. "This is about my daughter's dreams, her future, her happiness." "Her happiness?" Caroline's voice rose to a near shriek. "You think happiness comes from playing violin in some suburban living room? You think happiness comes from chasing impossible dreams, while reality closes in around you? She was gripping the violin tighter now, her knuckles white against the aged wood. Sophie had stopped crying and was staring at her aunt with growing fear. "Aunt Caroline, please," Sophie said. "You're holding it too tight. The neck is fragile." "Fragile?" Caroline repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, I suppose it is. Just like the dreams you've built around it." What happened next unfolded in slow motion, each second stretching into eternity. Caroline raised the violin above her head, her face twisted with a rage that seemed to come from some deep, poisoned well inside her. Sophie screamed, reaching toward the instrument with desperate hands. Patricia gasped, finally finding her voice too late to matter. And I stood frozen, unable to process what I was seeing, unable to believe that my own sister would destroy something so precious, so irreplaceable. The violin hit the hardwood floor with a sickening crack. The sound was unlike anything I had ever heard, wood and varnish and history splintering into fragments. But Caroline wasn't finished. She brought her heel down on the body of the instrument, grinding the spruce soundboard into splinters. The neck snapped with a sound like breaking bones, and the strings whipped loose, coiling like dying snakes across the floor. Sophie's scream echoed through the house, a sound of pure anguish that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. She dropped to her knees beside the wreckage, her hands hovering over the pieces as if she could somehow heal them through touch alone. "Now maybe you'll focus on something more realistic," Caroline said, brushing wood dust from her hands with satisfaction. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I could only stare at the destruction scattered across my living room floor, at my daughter's broken heart, at my sister's triumphant smile. Patricia finally found her voice. "Caroline, that was unnecessary." "Was it, Mother? Or was it exactly what this family needed? A dose of reality to cut through Victoria's delusions?" Caroline smoothed her coat and picked up her purse. "Sophie, darling, I know this seems harsh now, but someday you'll thank me. Someday you'll understand that I saved you from years of disappointment and failure." Sophie looked up from the wreckage, her face streaked with tears. "You destroyed great-grandmother's violin. You destroyed everything." "I destroyed an illusion," Caroline corrected. "The violin was just wood and strings. Your future is what matters, and that future lies in the real world, not in some concert hall fantasy." She moved toward the door, expecting Patricia to follow. Our mother hesitated, looking down at Sophie with something that might have been regret. "I'm sorry," Patricia whispered, though whether she was apologizing to Sophie or to the ghost of her own mother, I couldn't tell. "Sorry doesn't fix this," Sophie said, her voice hollow with grief. After they left, the house felt like a crime scene. Sophie gathered the pieces of the violin with trembling hands, cradling them against her chest as if she could somehow protect what remained. The Kennedy Center audition was in 3 days, and without an instrument, it might as well have been on another planet. I finally found my voice. "Sophie, I'm so sorry. I should have stopped her. I should have protected you." "It's not your fault, Mom," Sophie said, though her voice cracked with the effort of being strong. Aunt Caroline was right about one thing. Dreams are fragile. Maybe too fragile for the real world. That night, as Sophie cried herself to sleep, surrounded by the pieces of her great-grandmother's violin, I made a decision. I would find a way to replace the instrument. I would move heaven and earth to get my daughter to that audition. Caroline thought she had won, but she had forgotten something crucial about me. I was my daughter's mother, and mothers don't give up. Monday morning arrived like a slap of cold reality. I sat in my office at Morrison Financial Group, staring at the client portfolios spread across my mahogany desk, but the numbers blurred together into meaningless columns. Every few minutes, my phone would buzz with a text from Sophie, updates from school that felt increasingly desperate. "Ms. Rodriguez found a rental violin, but it sounds different. The strings feel wrong under my fingers. What if I can't adjust in time?" I had spent Sunday frantically calling every music store within a 100-mile radius. searching for an instrument that could even approximate the quality of the destroyed family heirloom. The rental violin we'd settled on was adequate, serviceable, but it lacked the warmth and resonance that Sophie had grown accustomed to over years of practice. It was like asking a painter to create a masterpiece with crayons instead of oils. My assistant, Rachel Kim, knocked on the office door and entered with her usual morning efficiency. Rachel had been with Morrison Financial for 6 years, and in that time, she'd become more than just a colleague. She had an uncanny ability to read the emotional temperature of any room, and today was no exception. "You look like you haven't slept," she said, setting a steaming cup of coffee on my desk. "Rough weekend?" I considered deflecting, giving her the standard response about being tired or stressed about work. But something in her concerned expression broke through my usual professional reserve. "My sister destroyed Sophie's violin," I said quietly. "The one that's been in our family for generations. The one she was supposed to use for her Kennedy Center audition." Rachel's expression shifted from concern to outrage. "She what?" "Victoria, that's destruction of property. That's emotional abuse of a child. Have you called the police?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Had I called the police? The thought had crossed my mind, but it had been immediately overwhelmed by other considerations. Caroline was married to a diplomat. Our father was the defense secretary. The Hayes family name carried weight in Washington circles, and that weight could crush someone like me if I wasn't careful. "It's complicated," I said finally. "Family situations always are." "No, it's not complicated," Rachel said firmly. "A grown woman deliberately destroyed a child's musical instrument 3 days before a major audition. That's not family dynamics, that's cruelty." She paused, studying my face. "Unless there's something else going on here." Before I could respond, my phone rang. The caller ID made my blood freeze. General Robert Hayes. My father rarely called during business hours, and when he did, it was usually to deliver some form of criticism or unwanted advice. "I need to take this," I told Rachel, who nodded and quietly left the office, closing the door behind her. "Hello, Dad." "Victoria." His voice carried the crisp authority that had commanded respect in Pentagon briefing rooms for decades. "I understand there was some drama at your house yesterday." Drama. He reduced Caroline's act of destruction to drama, as if Sophie's heartbreak was nothing more than teenage theatrics. "Caroline destroyed Sophie's violin," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "The violin that belonged to great-grandmother Elsa. Sophie has an audition at the Kennedy Center in 2 days. Yes, Caroline mentioned the incident. She's concerned about the direction you're taking with Sophie's education. As am I." "The direction I'm taking?" "Dad, Sophie is extraordinarily talented. She has a real chance at the National Youth Orchestra scholarship." A long pause. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted to what I recognized as his negotiation voice, the one he used when he wanted to appear reasonable while maneuvering for advantage. "Victoria, I'm going to speak plainly because I care about both you and my granddaughter. This music obsession has gone too far. Sophie is 15 years old. She should be focusing on academics, on building skills that will serve her in the real world. Music is her passion, Dad. She lights up when she plays. You should see her face when she masters a difficult piece. Passion doesn't pay bills. Passion doesn't provide security. I've seen too many young people chase artistic dreams only to end up struggling financially for the rest of their lives." His voice softened slightly, taking on what he probably thought was a paternal tone. "I don't want that for Sophie. I don't want her to end up like..." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. "Like me, struggling to make ends meet, living paycheck to paycheck, dependent on family goodwill for financial stability. Sophie's college fund is secure," I said. "I've been very careful about her financial future." "Have you?" The question was deceptively casual. "Because I've been looking at some of the transactions, and I'm concerned about your investment choices." My mouth went dry. "What transactions?" "Dad, you don't have access to Sophie's college account." "Don't I?" The silence stretched between us, loaded with implications. "Victoria, when you established that fund, you listed me as a secondary beneficiary in case something happened to you. That gives me certain oversight privileges. I grabbed my computer mouse and clicked frantically through banking websites, entering passwords with shaking fingers. Sophie's college fund account loaded slowly, each second stretching into eternity. When the balance finally appeared, I stared at the screen in disbelief. $25,000. Gone. Dad, where's the money? There should be over $40,000 in this account. The money has been transferred to a more secure investment vehicle, one that will actually grow instead of stagnating in a low-yield savings account. You moved my daughter's money without my permission? Our granddaughter's money, he corrected. And yes, I moved it to protect her future. The same future you're jeopardizing with these expensive music lessons and unrealistic expectations. I felt like I was drowning, gasping for air in a room that had suddenly become too small. Dad, that money belongs to Sophie. I've been contributing to that fund for 10 years, and I've just ensured that it will be there when she needs it for a real education. Pre-med at Georgetown, perhaps. Or business at George Washington University. Something practical. What if she doesn't want to study medicine or business? Then she'll learn to want it. His voice hardened. Victoria, I'm trying to help you here. Carolyn is right about one thing. You've lost perspective. This violin nonsense has clouded your judgment. It's not nonsense. Dad, if you could just hear her play. I don't need to hear her play. I need to see her succeed in life, and success requires practical choices. He paused, and when he continued, his tone carried a warning. The money will be returned to an education fund when Sophie enrolls in an approved program at an accredited university. Until then, it remains in trust. In trust? Dad, you can't just steal my daughter's college money because you disagree with her career goals. I'm not stealing anything. I'm protecting it. And Victoria, I'd be very careful about your language. Accusations of theft are serious matters, especially when they involve federal officials. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. My father hadn't achieved his position by being careless with words. He knew exactly how much damage he could inflict with a few phone calls, a few words in the right ears. This isn't over, I said quietly. No, it's not. But it will be resolved in Sophie's best interests, not in service to your unfulfilled artistic dreams. The line went dead. I sat staring at the phone for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. My own father had stolen my daughter's college fund. Not stolen, he would argue. Protected, secured, transferred to ensure proper use. The semantics didn't change the reality. Sophie's financial future was now contingent on abandoning her musical aspirations. Rachel knocked and entered without waiting for permission, carrying a fresh cup of coffee and wearing an expression of barely contained fury. I could hear raised voices through the door, she said. And your face right now tells me it's worse than I thought. I explained about the missing money, about my father's ultimatum, about the impossible choice he was forcing on Sophie. Rachel listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each detail. Victoria, this is financial abuse. It doesn't matter that he's your father or that he has good intentions. He can't legally move money from an account without proper authorization. He says he has oversight privileges as secondary beneficiary. Secondary beneficiary doesn't mean co-owner. It means he gets the money if something happens to you, not that he can make unilateral decisions about investments. Rachel pulled out her phone. I'm calling David Chen. He's the best family law attorney in the city. Rachel, I can't afford to fight my father in court. Do you understand who he is? What kind of resources he has access to? Do you understand what kind of precedent this sets? If he can steal Sophie's college fund to control her career choices, what's next? What happens when she graduates high school and wants to study music anyway? What happens when she gets married and he disapproves of her choice? What happens when she has children and he decides their upbringing isn't meeting his standards? The questions hit like physical blows. I had spent so many years trying to maintain peace with my family, trying to prove that I could be successful despite their doubts, that I had never considered the long-term implications of their control. But he's right about one thing, I said quietly. Music is a difficult career path. Maybe I am being unrealistic. Rachel set down her coffee cup with enough force to make me look up. Victoria Hayes, in the 6 years I've worked with you, I have watched you build one of the most successful client portfolios in this company. You have a gift for understanding what people need, for protecting their financial futures, for making smart decisions under pressure. You are not an unrealistic dreamer. But Sophie's violin career is Sophie's choice to make, not yours, and certainly not your father's. She's 15 years old, which means she has 3 years to explore her options, to develop her talent, to see where it leads. Maybe she'll become a professional musician. Maybe she'll study music and become a teacher. Maybe she'll double major in music and business. The point is, those choices should be hers to make. A new voice joined the conversation. Excuse me, is this Victoria Hayes' office? We turned to see a woman in her 60s standing in the doorway, silver hair pulled into an elegant bun, wearing a navy blue dress that spoke of quiet authority. She carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. I'm Victoria Hayes, I said, standing. How can I help you? My name is Dr. Margaret Thompson. I'm the Director of String Studies at the Potomac Conservatory. I believe you're Sophie's mother? My heart skipped. Yes, Sophie studies with Ms. Rodriguez. Is everything all right? Dr. Thompson smiled, but it was a sad expression. Elena called me this morning. She told me what happened to Sophie's violin, and about the Kennedy Center audition. I wanted to speak with you personally. She entered the office fully, and I noticed she was carrying a violin case. May I sit down? What I have to say might take a few minutes. Rachel quietly excused herself, though I caught her meaningful look as she left. Doctor. Thompson settled into the chair across from my desk and opened the violin case with practiced care. This belonged to one of my former students, she said, revealing an instrument that gleamed with the warm patina of age and care. Sarah graduated from Juilliard 15 years ago and is now first violin with the Philadelphia Orchestra. She asked me to give this to Sophie for her audition. I stared at the violin, overwhelmed by the generosity of strangers who understood what my own family couldn't. Dr. Thompson, I don't know what to say. This is incredibly generous, but I couldn't possibly accept such a valuable instrument. You're not accepting it. You're borrowing it. Sarah remembers what it was like to be a young musician facing impossible odds. She wants to give Sophie the chance she deserves. Dr. Thompson lifted the violin from its case, testing the strings with gentle fingers. Ms. Hayes, may I speak frankly about your daughter's talent? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. In 30 years of teaching, I have encountered perhaps a dozen students with Sophie's combination of technical skill and musical intuition. Not dozens per year. Dozens total. What she possesses is genuinely rare. My family thinks music is an impractical career choice. Your family is entitled to their opinion. They are not entitled to destroy your daughter's opportunities based on that opinion. Dr. Thompson's voice carried steel beneath the courtesy. Elena told me about the incident with your sister. In any other context, we would call that assault. The deliberate destruction of a musical instrument is an attack on the musician's ability to practice their craft. But they have valid concerns about financial stability, about the competitiveness of the music world. Dr. Thompson leaned forward, her eyes intense. Ms. Hayes, do you know what the average starting salary is for a member of a major symphony orchestra? I shook my head. $80,000, with full benefits and a pension plan. Musicians who teach privately can earn significantly more. Those who perform chamber music, who record, who tour, can build very comfortable lives. She paused. Your family's concerns about financial stability are based on outdated stereotypes about starving artists. Even so, the odds of success are better for Sophie than for most young people pursuing any competitive field. Medicine, law, business. They all require years of expensive education with no guarantee of success. At least Sophie already knows she has the talent. The question is whether she'll have the opportunity to develop it. Dr. Thompson closed the violin case and stood. The audition is Wednesday at 2 o'clock. Sophie will need to arrive an hour early for warm-up. Elena will meet you there to provide last-minute coaching. Dr. Thompson, What if she doesn't get in? What if my family is right about this being unrealistic? The older woman paused at the door. Then Sophie will have learned something valuable about pursuing excellence, about taking risks, about not letting other people's fears define her possibilities. That's an education worth having, regardless of the outcome. After she left, I sat alone in my office, staring at the violin case and thinking about choices. My phone buzzed with another text from Sophie. Mom, I found some sheet music in the rental violin case. Someone wrote notes in the margins about fingering techniques. Do you think they were a student like me? I typed back, I think they were someone who understood what music means to the people who love it. That evening, I drove to Sophie's lesson at the Potomac Conservatory. The building was a converted mansion in Old Town Alexandria, its practice rooms filled with the overlapping sounds of scales, etudes, and fragments of classical repertoire. I had always found the cacophony comforting, a reminder that beauty was being created through discipline and dedication. Elena Rodriguez met me in the lobby, her expression serious. How is Sophie handling the change in instruments? Better than I expected. Dr. Thompson brought her a loaner violin from one of your former students. Elena's face lit up. Sarah Chen's violin? That's perfect. It has a similar tonal quality to Sophie's family instrument. Her expression grew concerned. Victoria, Sophie told me what happened with your sister. I want you to know that what you witnessed was not normal family conflict. It was targeted destruction designed to crush a child's spirit. I keep wondering if I should have seen it coming, should have protected the violin better. You couldn't have predicted such deliberate cruelty, but Victoria, there's something else I need to tell you. Sophie isn't just talented. She's exceptional in ways that most people, even music educators, rarely encounter. Elena gestured toward the practice rooms, where the sounds of student musicians filled the air. Most of these young people are very good. Some will become professional musicians, others will study music in college and then pursue other careers. But Sophie operates on a different level entirely. What do you mean? She doesn't just play music, she inhabits it. When she performs, she becomes a conduit for something larger than herself. That's not talent that can be taught or replicated. It's a gift. Through the window of practice room 3, I could see Sophie working with the borrowed violin, her face intense with concentration as she navigated a particularly challenging passage. Even from a distance, I could see the difference in her posture, her confidence. This instrument responded to her touch in ways the rental never had. Elena, my father has taken Sophie's college fund. He says he'll return it only if she pursues a practical major, like pre-med or business. Elena's expression hardened. That's financial coercion. It's a form of abuse specifically designed to control young people's educational choices. He says he's protecting her future. He's protecting his own image. Some families view artistic success as somehow less legitimate than traditional careers, even when those artistic careers are more financially rewarding. Elena paused. Victoria, I need to ask you something and I want you to think carefully before you answer. I nodded. If Sophie gets into the National Youth Orchestra, if she receives a full scholarship to a prestigious conservatory, if every door opens for her musical career, will you support her choices even if it means fighting your family? The question hung between us like a bridge I would either cross or abandon. Supporting Sophie meant accepting that my relationship with my father and sister might never recover. It meant choosing my daughter's dreams over family peace. It meant risking the Hayes family's considerable power and influence. Yes, I said quietly. I will support her choices. Even if it costs you financially? Even if your family cuts you off completely? I thought about Sophie's face when she played, about the joy that radiated from her when she mastered a difficult piece, about the light in her eyes when she talked about her musical future. Yes, even then. Elena smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. Good, because Sophie is going to need that support in the years ahead. Exceptional talent often comes with exceptional challenges. What kind of challenges? The music world can be demanding, competitive, sometimes cruel. Sophie will need someone in her corner who believes in her unconditionally, who won't be swayed by criticism or setbacks or well-meaning people who think they know what's best for her. Through the practice room window, Sophie had moved on to the Vivaldi piece, the one that Carolyn had interrupted so violently. But now, with the borrowed violin, the music soared with renewed power and beauty. Other students had stopped their own practice to listen, drawn by the pure emotion pouring from the strings. "She's going to be extraordinary," Elena said softly. "The question is whether the adults in her life will give her the chance to become everything she's capable of being." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, making lists. On one side, I wrote down the challenges: my father's financial control, Caroline's ongoing hostility, the competitive nature of the music world, the uncertainty of artistic careers. On the other side, I wrote down the reasons to fight: Sophie's exceptional talent, her passion for music, her right to choose her own path, the possibility of a scholarship, the support of her teachers. The second list was longer. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found David Chen's number. Rachel had been right about one thing. This wasn't just about music or money or family dynamics. This was about a young woman's right to pursue her dreams without financial coercion or emotional manipulation. The phone rang twice before David answered. "Victoria? It's late. Is everything all right?" "No," I said. "It's not all right. But I'm ready to do something about it." Wednesday morning dawned gray and bitter, the kind of December day that made Washington, D.C. feel like a city carved from ice. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror at 5:30, applying concealer under eyes that hadn't seen sleep in 48 hours. Today was Sophie's audition at the Kennedy Center, the moment we had been preparing for through months of intensive practice and years of gradual skill building. Yet, instead of excitement, I felt the weight of impending disaster pressing down on my shoulders like a physical force. Sophie appeared in the doorway, already dressed in her audition outfit. A simple black dress with three-quarter sleeves, her hair pulled back in a neat bun that showcased the elegant line of her neck when she played. She looked older than her 15 years, composed and professional, but I could see the tremor in her hands as she adjusted her pearl earrings. "Did you eat breakfast?" I asked, though my own stomach was too knotted to consider food. "Toast and orange juice," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "Elena says it's important to have enough energy, but not so much that I feel sluggish during the performance." We moved through the morning routine with the precision of a well-rehearsed dance. Sophie warmed up with scales and technical exercises while I packed her audition folder with sheet music, rosin, and backup strings. The borrowed violin rested in its case like a sleeping bird, waiting to carry my daughter's dreams into one of the most prestigious venues in the world. At 8:15, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. "Ms. Hayes, this is Lily Park from Channel 7 News. I'm calling about a story we're investigating regarding Defense Secretary Robert Hayes and alleged financial misconduct involving family members." My blood turned to ice water. "I'm sorry, what?" "We've received information suggesting that the Defense Secretary may have used his position to gain unauthorized access to private financial accounts, specifically educational funds belonging to his granddaughter. Would you be available for a comment?" I ended the call without responding, my hands shaking as I stared at the phone. How had the media gotten hold of this information? The only people who knew about the missing college fund were Rachel, David Chen, and Elena Rodriguez. None of them would have contacted reporters without discussing it with me first, unless someone else was feeding information to the press. Someone who wanted to escalate this conflict beyond the boundaries of family disagreement. "Mom?" Sophie's voice carried a note of concern. "Who was that?" "Wrong number," I lied, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Are you ready to go?" The drive to the Kennedy Center should have been a celebration, a culmination of years of dedication and sacrifice. Instead, it felt like driving toward an execution. My phone buzzed repeatedly with calls from unknown numbers, each one likely another reporter seeking comment on a story that could destroy my father's career, and by extension, tear our family apart completely. Sophie sat in the passenger seat, fingering through her sheet music one final time, her lips moving silently as she worked through the most challenging passages. The borrowed violin case rested across her lap like a talisman, and I found myself praying to whatever forces governed artistic achievement that this instrument would serve her as well as her great-grandmothers had. "Mom," Sophie said as we crossed the Potomac River, the Kennedy Center's white marble facade gleaming in the distance. "What happens if I don't get in?" The question I had been dreading, delivered with the matter-of-fact tone that teenagers used when discussing the end of the world. I considered offering empty reassurances, platitudes about trying your best and learning from the experience. Instead, I chose honesty. "Then we'll figure out another path. There are other orchestras, other scholarships, other opportunities. This audition is important, but it's not the only door that will ever open for you." "But Grandpa Robert's money will not determine your future," I said firmly. "We'll find a way to pay for college, with or without his help. I promise you that." Sophie nodded, though I could see doubt lingering in her expression. At 15, she was old enough to understand the practical realities of college tuition, old enough to know that promises and determination weren't always sufficient to overcome financial obstacles. The Kennedy Center rose before us like a temple dedicated to artistic achievement, its grand foyer bustling with young musicians and their families. Sophie joined the check-in line while I found a seat in the waiting area, surrounded by the nervous energy of parents whose children were about to be judged by some of the most discerning ears in the classical music world. Elena Rodriguez appeared beside me, carrying her usual leather satchel and wearing an expression of focused intensity. "How is Sophie feeling?" "Nervous but prepared," I said. "How many students are auditioning today?" 47 violinists for 12 spots in the orchestra. But Sophie isn't competing against the other students. She's competing against the standard. If she plays at her best level, she'll earn a place regardless of how well others perform. A young man in his 20s approached, clipboard in hand, and wearing the kind of efficient smile that suggested years of experience managing anxious families. "Ms. Hayes? I'm Michael from the orchestra administration. Sophie will be called for her audition in approximately 45 minutes. She can use practice room 7 for warm-up if she'd like." Sophie nodded gratefully and disappeared down the hallway with Elena, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my increasingly insistent phone. The 5th call in 20 minutes came from the Washington Post. The 6th from CNN. By the 7th call, I realized that ignoring the media wasn't going to make this story disappear. I stepped outside onto the Kennedy Center's river terrace, where the December wind cut through my coat like a blade. David Chen answered on the first ring. "Victoria, I've been trying to reach you. We have a problem." "The reporters?" "That's just the beginning. Someone leaked information about your father's access to Sophie's college fund to multiple news outlets. But here's the thing. The details they have are too specific to have come from our conversations. Someone with inside knowledge is feeding them information." "Inside knowledge?" "David, the only people who know about the missing money are you, me, Rachel, and Elena. And your father. And whoever helped him move the money. And potentially your sister, if she was part of the planning." David's voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to navigating crisis situations. "Victoria, this story is going to break within hours. The Defense Secretary's office is already fielding calls from reporters asking about financial impropriety and family conflicts." I leaned against the terrace railing, watching the Potomac River flow beneath gray skies. "David, my daughter is about to audition for the National Youth Orchestra. This is the most important day of her life. I can't deal with media scandals right now. You may not have a choice. If your father decides to fight back against these allegations, he has resources that most people can't imagine. Pentagon lawyers, political operatives, media specialists who know how to control narratives. What kind of fight back? Character assassination. They'll paint you as an unstable single mother who's manipulating the situation for attention. They'll dig into your financial history, your personal relationships, your parenting decisions. They'll make you the villain in this story." The wind picked up, carrying the sound of traffic from the Roosevelt Bridge and the distant hum of aircraft approaching Reagan National Airport. Below me, tourists moved across the Kennedy Center Plaza, oblivious to the personal drama unfolding in the shadows of their cultural pilgrimage. "There's something else," David said quietly. "I've been researching your father's military record, specifically his assignments and security clearances. Victoria, if he used his Pentagon access to investigate private financial institutions, if he leveraged his position to move money without proper authorization, he could be facing criminal charges." Criminal charges? Abuse of power, financial misconduct, potentially fraud if he forged any documents. The military takes these violations very seriously, especially when they involve family members. I closed my eyes, trying to process the implications. My attempt to protect Sophie's college fund had potentially triggered a federal investigation that could destroy my father's career and legacy. "David, I just wanted him to return my daughter's money. I never intended for this to become a public scandal. Sometimes private family conflicts escalate beyond anyone's control. The question now is how far you're willing to go to protect Sophie's interests." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from a number I recognized. Caroline. I had been avoiding her calls since Monday, but something told me this conversation would be different. "David, I need to take this call. Can we continue this later?" "Victoria, be very careful what you say to your family right now. Assume every conversation might become public." Caroline's voice was ice-wrapped in silk. "Victoria, darling, we need to talk. Immediately. I'm at Sophie's audition. Whatever you want to discuss can wait." "No, it cannot wait. The reporters who have been calling our father are now calling me. They're asking about Sophie's violin, about the scene at your house, about family dynamics and financial arrangements." Caroline's practiced composure was cracking around the edges. "You've turned a private family matter into a media circus." "I didn't contact any reporters, Caroline." "Then how do they know about the college fund? How do they know about the violin?" "Victoria, if you think you can use the press to manipulate our father into giving you money, you're making a serious miscalculation." The accusation hit like a physical blow. "You think I called reporters?" "Caroline, why would I want our family's private business spread across the news?" "Because you've always been dramatic, and now you've found an audience for your theatrics. But let me be very clear about something. If you continue this campaign against our father, there will be consequences you haven't considered." "What kind of consequences?" Caroline's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. The kind that involved Child Protective Services receiving anonymous reports about Sophie's living situation. Reports about a mother who prioritizes her daughter's expensive hobbies over basic necessities. Reports about financial instability and questionable judgment. The threat was so blatant, so vicious, that for a moment I couldn't speak. My own sister was threatening to use government agencies to separate me from my daughter. "You wouldn't dare." "Wouldn't I?" "Victoria, you seem to forget that I'm married to someone with extensive connections in federal agencies. One phone call from the right person, and Sophie could be removed from your custody pending an investigation into your fitness as a parent." "Based on what evidence?" "Based on whatever evidence needs to exist." A 15-year-old girl living in a modest house with a single mother who spends thousands of dollars on music lessons while struggling to pay basic expenses? A mother who allows her daughter to pursue unrealistic dreams instead of focusing on practical education? A mother who's now embroiled in a public scandal involving her own family? I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles went white. Through the glass doors of the Kennedy Center, I could see other parents waiting for their children's auditions, faces filled with normal parental anxiety about performance and competition. None of them were dealing with family members who used child custody as a weapon. "Caroline, if you try to take Sophie away from me, you'll what? Fight me in court? With what money, Victoria? Your father has frozen the college fund, and legal battles are expensive. How long do you think you can afford to fight both a custody case and a media scandal?" The calculation was brutally simple. Caroline had identified my greatest vulnerability and was prepared to exploit it without hesitation. She was betting that my love for Sophie would force me to surrender, to accept the destruction of the violin and the theft of the college money rather than risk losing my daughter entirely. "What do you want?" I asked quietly. "I want you to call David Chen and tell him you're dropping the case against our father. I want you to tell the reporters that this was all a misunderstanding, that the college fund issue has been resolved amicably. I want you to stop this nonsense and focus on being a responsible parent. And if I do that, then Sophie can continue living with you, and our father might consider restoring the college funds if she pursues an approved academic program. Everyone wins. Except Sophie loses her chance at a music career. Sophie gets to grow up with her mother instead of in foster care while you fight legal battles you can't win. That seems like a reasonable trade-off. The conversation ended with Caroline's ultimatum echoing in my head. Surrender completely or risk losing everything. I stood on the terrace for several minutes, watching clouds gather over the Potomac River and wondering how a simple desire to support my daughter's talent had escalated into a war that could destroy our entire future. When I returned to the waiting area, Elena was sitting alone, checking her watch with the focused attention of someone monitoring crucial timing. "Where's Sophie?" I asked. "Practice room 7. She's been warming up for 20 minutes and sounds confident." Elena studied my face. "You look like you've seen a ghost. What's happened?" I explained about the reporters, the threats, Caroline's ultimatum. Elena listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each detail. "Victoria, your sister is engaging in what we call instrumental abuse, using institutions like Child Protective Services as weapons to control family members. It's a recognized form of psychological warfare. But could she actually get Sophie taken away? Temporarily, possibly. CPS is required to investigate all reports, even those that are obviously malicious. But the investigation would ultimately clear you, especially with the documentation we have about your family's pattern of emotional abuse. Elena, I can't risk Sophie being placed in foster care, even temporarily. The trauma alone would be devastating. More devastating than watching her artistic dreams be systematically destroyed by people who claim to love her?" The question hung between us like a sword. Through the practice room doors, I could hear fragments of Vivaldi, Bach, and Mozart as young musicians prepared for their auditions. Sophie's sound was distinctive even among this gathering of exceptional talent, her phrasing more mature, her technical execution more polished. "There's something else you need to know," Elena said quietly. "I've been in contact with several college music programs about Sophie's potential applications. Juilliard, Curtis, New England Conservatory. Based on her current skill level and rate of improvement, she would be competitive for full scholarships at any of these institutions. Full scholarships, tuition, room, board, even stipends for living expenses. Sophie's talent is at a level where schools would compete for her enrollment. The college fund your father is controlling? She might not need it at all." For the first time in days, I felt a flutter of hope. If Sophie could earn full scholarships based on her musical ability, my father's financial threats would become meaningless. She could pursue her dreams without being beholden to family approval or family money. But she would need to maintain her current trajectory, Elena continued, which means consistent, high-quality instruction, performance opportunities, and emotional support. If her confidence is shattered by family conflict, if she's forced to abandon music for practical subjects, those scholarship opportunities will disappear. A young woman appeared at Elena's side, wearing the same efficient smile as the earlier administrator. "Sophie Hayes, we're ready for your audition." My heart began racing as Sophie emerged from the practice room, the borrowed violin case in one hand and her music folder in the other. She looked calm, focused, ready to pour years of preparation into 15 minutes of performance that could change her life. "Mom," she said quietly, "there are reporters outside asking about Grandpa Robert. Are we in some kind of trouble?" I looked into my daughter's eyes, seeing trust and concern, and the kind of innocence that disappears once children realize that adults don't always protect them from the world's cruelties. "Everything's going to be fine," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. "Just focus on your music. Play like you did yesterday in practice, and let everything else fade away." Sophie nodded and followed the administrator down the hallway toward the audition room. Elena squeezed my hand. "Whatever happens with your family, whatever threats they make, remember that Sophie has something they can't take away from her. Her talent belongs to her, not to them." I watched my daughter disappear around the corner, carrying borrowed instrument toward an uncertain future, and I realized that Elena was wrong about one thing. My family had already taken something irreplaceable from Sophie: The security of knowing that the adults in her life would support her dreams unconditionally. They had taught her that love came with conditions, that approval required conformity, that pursuing excellence could be dangerous if it threatened other people's expectations. But they had also given her something valuable, though they hadn't intended to: the knowledge that she would have to fight for what mattered to her. That realization, brutal as it was for a 15-year-old, might ultimately make her stronger than she would have been with easier support. My phone buzzed with another unknown number. This time I answered. "Ms. Hayes, this is Jennifer Walsh from the Pentagon's Public Affairs Office. We need to schedule an immediate meeting regarding the allegations against Defense Secretary Hayes. Can you be in our offices within 2 hours? I'm sorry, but my daughter is currently auditioning for the National Youth Orchestra. I can't leave." "Ma'am, this is not a request. These are serious allegations involving a senior government official. Your cooperation is required." The institutional weight behind her words was unmistakable. This was no longer a family conflict or even a media story. This had become a federal investigation, and I was about to be pulled into machinery that cared nothing about my daughter's dreams or my desires for privacy. "I'll be there as soon as my daughter's audition is finished," I said. "And when will that be?" I looked down the hallway where Sophie had disappeared, toward the audition room where she was probably tuning the borrowed violin, preparing to play for judges who would determine whether years of practice and sacrifice had been worthwhile. "When it's finished," I said, and ended the call. For the next hour, I sat in the Kennedy Center waiting area, surrounded by the anxious energy of other parents, while my phone rang continuously with calls from reporters, government officials, and legal representatives. Each ring represented another escalation in a conflict that had spiraled far beyond my ability to control. But for that hour, I ignored all of it. I sat quietly and listened to the faint sounds of music drifting from the audition rooms, knowing that somewhere behind those doors my daughter was doing what she was born to do. Whatever happened next, whatever prices we would pay for refusing to surrender her dreams, this moment belonged to Sophie, and to the music that lived inside her. The borrowed violin would have to be enough to carry her across whatever bridges we were about to burn. Sophie emerged from the audition room 47 minutes later, her face flushed with the particular combination of exhaustion and exhilaration that follows intense musical performance. The borrowed violin case hung at her side, and I could see from her posture that something fundamental had shifted during those minutes behind closed doors. "How did it go?" I asked, though her expression already suggested the answer. "The Vivaldi felt perfect," she said, her voice carrying a wonder that made my heart ache. "The borrowed violin responded like it was singing along with me, and the judges asked me to play an additional piece, something sight-reading that I'd never seen before." Elena Rodriguez appeared beside us, her face bright with professional satisfaction. "They only ask for additional repertoire when they're seriously considering a candidate. Sophie, you should be very proud of what you accomplished in there." But even as I celebrated this moment of triumph, my phone continued its relentless buzzing. The Pentagon meeting loomed like a storm cloud, and I knew that the next few hours would determine whether Sophie's artistic success would matter at all in the face of the larger forces we had unleashed. "Mom," Sophie said, noticing my distraction, "you look worried. Did something happen while I was playing?" Before I could craft a response that would preserve her post-audition glow, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the Kennedy Center lobby. General Robert Hayes, Defense Secretary of the United States, walked through the marble corridors with the bearing of someone accustomed to commanding respect in the world's most powerful institutions. He wore his dress uniform, 3 stars gleaming on his shoulders, ribbons and decorations speaking to decades of distinguished service. Behind him walked Caroline, her designer coat, and calculated elegance making her look like the political spouse she had become through marriage. But it was the third figure that made my blood turn cold. A woman in a conservative business suit carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the kind of badge that suggested federal law enforcement credentials. "Grandfather!" Sophie's face lit up with genuine joy, the kind of uncomplicated happiness that comes from seeing a beloved family member at an important moment. She rushed toward him with the borrowed violin case still in her hand. General Hayes embraced her with what appeared to be genuine affection, though I could see the tension in his jaw, the careful way he positioned himself for the benefit of anyone who might be watching or recording this family reunion. How did the audition go, sweetheart? He asked, his voice carrying the warm authority that had made him effective in countless diplomatic situations. I think it went really well, grandfather. The judges seemed pleased, and they asked me to play extra pieces. Sophie's enthusiasm was infectious, momentarily softening even Caroline's practiced expression. I'm very proud of you, General Hayes said, and for a moment I almost believed he meant it. Then his eyes found mine across the lobby, and the temperature dropped 20 degrees. Victoria, we need to talk. Immediately. The woman with the federal credentials stepped forward, extending her hand with bureaucratic precision. Miss Hayes, I'm Agent Sarah Morrison from the Department of Defense Inspector General's office. We need to discuss some serious allegations that have come to our attention. Sophie looked between us, confusion replacing her post-audition joy. Allegations? What kind of allegations? Sophie, Caroline said smoothly, why don't you tell me more about your audition while the adults handle some boring paperwork issues? But Sophie was 15, not 5, and she could read the tension crackling between the adults like electricity before a thunderstorm. This is about the college fund, isn't it? About grandfather moving the money? Agent Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly. Out of the mouths of babes, her expression seemed to say. Here was a teenager who understood the situation more clearly than the adults who were trying to protect her from it. Sophie, I said carefully, why don't you wait with Elena while I handle this? Number. Sophie's voice carried a firmness I had rarely heard from her. This is about my money, my future, my family. I want to know what's happening. General Hayes and Caroline exchanged glances, some form of silent communication that suggested this scenario had been anticipated and planned for. Caroline moved closer to Sophie, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. Darling, sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions about financial matters. Your grandfather was trying to protect your college fund from being wasted on impractical pursuits. Impractical pursuits? Sophie's voice rose slightly, drawing the attention of other families in the Kennedy Center lobby. You mean my music? Agent Morrison stepped between us, her voice carrying the authority of federal investigation. Perhaps we could continue this conversation in a more private setting. Miss Hayes, you're required to accompany me for questioning regarding unauthorized access to financial accounts and potential abuse of federal position. The words hit like physical blows. Required. Questioning. Federal investigation. This was no longer a family conflict that could be resolved through negotiation or compromise. This had become a criminal matter, with the full weight of the federal government behind it. Am I under arrest? I asked. Not at this time, but your cooperation is mandatory, and failure to comply will result in escalation of this matter. Elena Rodriguez had been standing quietly at the edge of our group, but now she stepped forward with the calm authority of someone who had dealt with institutional pressure before. Agent Morrison, Ms. Hayes is not the subject of this investigation. The allegations involve Defense Secretary Hayes and unauthorized access to private financial accounts. Why is his daughter being compelled to answer questions about her father's actions? Agent Morrison's expression didn't change, but I caught a flicker of something that might have been respect. The investigation involves potential financial misconduct by a senior government official. Ms. Hayes may have information relevant to establishing the facts of this case. What she has, Elena said firmly, is a daughter who just auditioned for one of the most prestigious music programs in the country. Whatever questions you have can wait until family obligations are fulfilled. General Hayes finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of decades in command positions. Agent Morrison, I appreciate your diligence in pursuing this matter, but I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of the financial arrangements in question. He turned to Sophie, his expression shifting to something that might have been genuine grandfatherly concern. Sophie, I need you to understand something very important. The money I moved from your college account wasn't stolen or misappropriated. It was transferred to a more secure investment vehicle to ensure your financial future. Without asking Mom, Sophie said quietly. Without asking me. Because sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions to protect the people they love, even when those people don't understand the necessity of those decisions. Caroline nodded approvingly, as if her father had just delivered a masterclass in family leadership. Sophie, your grandfather has managed financial resources for the entire Department of Defense. He knows more about protecting money than most people could learn in a lifetime. But it wasn't his money to protect, Sophie said, her voice gaining strength. It was mine. For my education. For my future. Agent Morrison had been taking notes throughout this exchange, her pen moving steadily across an official-looking pad. Now she looked up with the expression of someone who had heard enough to draw preliminary conclusions. Defense Secretary Hayes. The allegations suggest that you used your federal position to gain unauthorized access to private financial institutions for personal purposes. Specifically, to override normal banking protocols and move money from accounts where you were not the primary account holder. I was listed as secondary beneficiary on those accounts, which gives me certain oversight privileges in matters involving my granddaughter's welfare. Secondary beneficiary status does not confer authority to make unilateral investment decisions, sir. It provides inheritance rights in the event of the primary account holder's death, not management authority during their lifetime. The legal distinction hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. General Hayes had overstepped his authority, had used his position and influence to circumvent normal banking procedures, and now faced potential criminal charges for actions he had justified as family protection. Sophie looked around at the adults who were debating her financial future, as if she were not standing right there, as if her opinions and desires were irrelevant to decisions that would shape her entire life. When she spoke, her voice carried a clarity that cut through all the legal and political maneuvering. I want the money returned to the original account. I want to make my own decisions about my education. And I want everyone to stop pretending this is about protecting me when it's really about controlling me. The silence that followed was profound. Here was a 15-year-old girl, standing in the Kennedy Center lobby with a borrowed violin case in her hand, demanding agency over her own future from some of the most powerful people in her world. Caroline recovered first, her voice taking on the condescending tone I remembered from childhood. Sophie, you're 15 years old. You don't understand the complexities of financial planning, or the realities of adult life. We're trying to save you from making mistakes you'll regret for the rest of your life. Like pursuing music? Like building your entire future around something as uncertain as artistic success. Sophie turned to face her aunt directly, and I saw something in her posture that reminded me of the way she held herself before attempting a particularly challenging musical passage. Focused, determined, unafraid of difficulty. Aunt Caroline, you destroyed great-grandmother Elsa's violin because you thought my music was a waste of time. But I just auditioned at the Kennedy Center with a borrowed instrument, and I played better than I've ever played in my life. Do you know why? Caroline's expression suggested she was not interested in hearing the answer, but Sophie continued anyway. Because music doesn't live in the violin, it lives in me. You can break instruments, you can steal money, you can threaten and manipulate and try to force me into the life you think I should want. But you can't take away what I am. Elena Rodriguez was smiling with the pride of a teacher whose student has just demonstrated mastery of a lesson that extends far beyond music. Agent Morrison had stopped taking notes and was watching this family drama with the fascination of someone witnessing a masterclass in human psychology. General Hayes stepped closer to his granddaughter, his voice softening in a way that suggested genuine emotion beneath the political calculation. Sophie, I've spent my entire career making difficult decisions to protect people, sometimes from threats they don't even recognize. The music world is brutal, competitive, financially unstable. I don't want to see you struggle the way so many artists struggle. But what if I don't struggle? What if I succeed? And what if you don't? What if you spend years preparing for a career that never materializes, while your peers are building practical skills and establishing themselves in stable professions? Sophie looked around at the Kennedy Center lobby, at the marble columns and soaring ceilings, at the photographs of legendary performers who had graced these stages. When she spoke, her voice carried the conviction of someone who had found their true north. Then I'll have spent those years doing something I love, something that makes me feel alive, something that connects me to a tradition that goes back centuries. Even if I fail, I'll have tried to become the person I'm meant to be. Agent Morrison closed her notebook with a decisive snap. Defense Secretary Hayes, based on what I've heard here today, I'm recommending that the Inspector General's office proceed with a full investigation into potential abuse of federal position. The financial transfers will need to be reversed pending the outcome of that investigation. Agent Morrison, Caroline interjected, surely there's room for discretion here. This is a family matter that's been blown out of proportion by media attention and misunderstanding. Ma'am, the moment a federal official used his position to circumvent banking regulations, this stopped being a family matter and became a potential criminal violation. The law doesn't recognize family exceptions for abuse of power. General Hayes straightened to his full height every inch the decorated military officer who had commanded respect in the Pentagon's corridors of power. But for the first time since I had known him, he looked older than his years, diminished by the consequences of his own choices. Agent Morrison, I accept full responsibility for my actions, but I want to be clear about one thing. Everything I did was motivated by concern for my granddaughter's welfare, not by personal gain or malicious intent. Sir, the road to federal prison is paved with good intentions. Intent matters less than actions when those actions violate federal regulations. The brutality of the statement hung in the air like a death sentence. My father, the decorated general, the defense secretary, the man who had commanded armies and advised presidents, faced potential criminal prosecution for trying to control his granddaughter's college fund. Sophie stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. Agent Morrison, if my grandfather returns the money to my college account immediately, if he agrees never to interfere with my educational choices again, would that affect the investigation? Agent Morrison studied Sophie with something approaching admiration. Young lady, criminal violations can't be resolved through family negotiations. But voluntary cooperation and immediate restitution would certainly be taken into consideration during any sentencing proceedings. Sentencing? Caroline's voice cracked slightly. You're talking about prison time? Ma'am, unauthorized use of federal position for personal benefit carries significant penalties under federal law. Defense Secretary Hayes has access to systems and influence that ordinary citizens don't possess. When that access is misused, the consequences are proportionally severe. General Hayes looked at his granddaughter. Really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. I saw something shift in his expression, some calculation that went beyond political damage control or family authority. Sophie, he said quietly, if I arrange for the immediate return of your college funds, if I promise never to interfere with your educational choices again, will you consider pursuing a double major? Music and something practical like business or international relations? It was a negotiation, a face-saving compromise that would allow him to step back from the precipice while maintaining some semblance of paternal authority. Sophie considered the offer with the same careful attention she gave to interpreting a complex musical score. I'll consider it, she said finally. But the decision will be mine to make, based on my interests and goals, not on anyone else's expectations or fears. General Hayes nodded slowly, the gesture of a man who had finally recognized that some battles couldn't be won through force or authority. Agent Morrison, he said formally, I will arrange for the immediate return of all funds to their original accounts. I will also submit a formal letter acknowledging that my actions exceeded my authority and apologizing for any appearance of impropriety. Sir, that's a good first step, but the investigation will still proceed. The Inspector General's office has a responsibility to determine whether federal regulations were violated and whether disciplinary action is warranted. Caroline moved closer to her father, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper that was nevertheless audible in the lobby's acoustics. Dad, this could destroy your career. Everything you've worked for, your legacy, your reputation. General Hayes looked at his younger daughter with an expression I had never seen from him before. Disappointment, mixed with something that might have been pity. Caroline, I've spent my entire career making decisions based on what I thought was right, not on what was politically expedient. I'm not going to start compromising my principles now to protect my reputation. He turned back to Sophie, his voice carrying genuine warmth for the first time in years. Sweetheart, I owe you an apology. I let my fears about your future override my respect for your choices. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. Sophie nodded, accepting the apology with grace that made me proud of the young woman she was becoming. But she wasn't finished. Grandfather, there's something else I need you to understand. When Aunt Caroline broke great-grandmother's violin, she wasn't just destroying an instrument. She was attacking everything that violin represented. Our family's musical heritage, the dreams that have been passed down through generations, the part of our history that connects us to something beautiful. Caroline's face flushed with anger or embarrassment or both. Sophie, that violin was just an old instrument. It wasn't some sacred relic. It was to me. And it should have been to you, because it represented the best parts of who we are as a family. Sophie's voice remained steady, but I could see tears gathering in her eyes. I don't need great-grandmother's violin to make music, but I needed you to respect what it meant to me. The accusation hung in the air like a judgment. Carolyn had revealed herself not just as someone who opposed Sophie's musical aspirations, but as someone who was willing to destroy irreplaceable family artifacts to make her point. Agent Morrison stepped forward again, her voice cutting through the emotional tension with bureaucratic precision. Defense Secretary Hayes, I'll need you to accompany me to complete the formal documentation of this matter. Ms. Hayes, you're free to go, but you may be contacted for additional questions as the investigation proceeds. As federal agents and family members began moving toward the Kennedy Center's exit, Elena Rodriguez approached Sophie and me with a smile that could have powered the building's lighting system. Sophie, I have some news that might make this day even better. The orchestra directors asked me to tell you that preliminary results will be announced this evening, but they wanted you to know that your audition was exceptional. You should expect good news. Sophie's face transformed, the stress and family drama momentarily forgotten in the face of artistic triumph. Really? They said that? They did. And something else. Juilliard's representative was in the audience today. She asked for your contact information. The implications hit me like lightning. If Sophie had impressed the Juilliard representative, if her audition had opened doors to the kind of opportunities that Elena had described, then the battle over her college fund might be irrelevant. She could pursue her dreams with or without family support, with or without family approval. As we walked toward the Kennedy Center's exit, Sophie fell into step beside me, the borrowed violin case swinging gently at her side. Mom, she said quietly, are you proud of me? I stopped walking and turned to face my daughter, this remarkable young woman who had stood up to generals and federal agents and family members who thought they knew what was best for her life. Sophie, I have never been more proud of anyone in my entire life, not just because you played beautifully today, but because you found your voice and used it to defend what matters to you. She smiled, the first completely unguarded expression I had seen from her since Caroline's destructive visit 3 days earlier. I learned that from watching you, she said. You could have given up when they took the money, when they threatened us, when everything seemed impossible. But you didn't. You fought for me, and that taught me to fight for myself. As we walked out into the December afternoon, I realized that regardless of investigation outcomes, or family reconciliations, or scholarship announcements, we had already won the most important victory. Sophie had learned that her dreams were worth defending, that her voice mattered, that she didn't have to choose between family approval and personal authenticity. The borrowed violin had carried her across the bridge between childhood and adulthood, between external validation and inner conviction. Whatever came next, she would face it as someone who knew her own worth. 3 weeks later, I stood in the arrivals terminal at Dulles International Airport, holding a sign that read Sarah Chen, and feeling nervous in a way I hadn't experienced since my own college auditions 25 years earlier. The woman approaching looked exactly as Elena had described her. Early 30s, confident stride, carrying a professional violin case that spoke of serious musical commitment. Ms. Hayes? Sarah extended her hand with a warm smile. I'm so excited to finally meet Sophie's mother. Elena has told me wonderful things about both of you. Sarah Chen had flown in from Philadelphia, specifically to hear Sophie play. to meet the teenager who had borrowed her violin for the Kennedy Center audition and subsequently earned acceptance into both the National Youth Orchestra and a full scholarship at 3 prestigious conservatories. What started as a simple loan between musicians had evolved into something approaching mentorship. Sophie is practicing at home, I said as we walked toward the parking garage. She's been working on a Bach partita that she wants to play for you. Fair warning, she practices about 5 hours a day now. Good. That level of dedication will serve her well at conservatory. Sarah settled into the passenger seat of my Honda, her violin case resting carefully across her lap. Elena mentioned that there were some family complications around the audition. How are things now? The question was diplomatically phrased, but I knew Elena had shared the broad outline of our family drama. The story had made national news for 3 days, until other political scandals pushed it from the headlines. Defense Secretary faces ethics investigation over granddaughter's college fund. The coverage had been brutal but brief, the kind of Washington scandal that burned hot and then disappeared into the news cycle's relentless churn. My father resigned from his position 2 weeks ago, I said, navigating the airport traffic with careful attention. The Inspector General's report concluded that he had violated federal ethics regulations, though no criminal charges were filed. He's facing some financial penalties and a formal reprimand, but nothing that will destroy his retirement. And your sister? The question I had been dreading, though I knew it would come up eventually. Carolyn's role in destroying the violin and threatening custody had become public knowledge during the investigation, painting her as the vindictive family member who had triggered the entire crisis. Carolyn hasn't spoken to me since the Kennedy Center confrontation. Her husband's diplomatic career has been affected by the negative publicity, and she blames me for not handling the situation more discreetly. I paused at a red light, choosing my words carefully. Honestly, I think she's embarrassed that her behavior was exposed so publicly. It's easier to be angry with me than to acknowledge her own actions. Some families struggle when one member pursues artistic excellence. It can highlight insecurities and unfulfilled dreams in ways that create lasting resentment. We drove through the Virginia suburbs toward my house, past shopping centers and residential developments that looked deceptively peaceful from the outside. How many of these homes contained their own versions of family conflict, their own battles between dreams and practicality, their own struggles over who got to define success? Sarah, can I ask you something personal? When you were Sophie's age, did your family support your music? Sarah laughed, though there was no humor in the sound. My parents wanted me to become a doctor. They saw music as a nice hobby, but never as a viable career path. I spent most of high school and college proving that I could make a living as a musician while maintaining good grades in pre-med courses. How did that work out? I got into medical school and conservatory the same year. I chose conservatory, and my parents didn't speak to me for 2 years. Sarah adjusted her violin case, her fingers unconsciously tracing its familiar contours. But when I won my position with the Philadelphia Orchestra, when they saw me performing in concert halls and earning a professional salary, they came around. Success has a way of changing people's perspectives. We pulled into my driveway, where Sophie was visible through the living room window, seated at the music stand I had moved near the bay window to catch the afternoon light. Even from outside, we could hear the complex interweaving melodies of Bach's Partita No. 2, played with the kind of mathematical precision and emotional depth that separated true musicians from talented amateurs. Oh my, Sarah said softly. Elena wasn't exaggerating about her development. That phrasing is remarkably mature. Sophie looked up as we entered the house, her face lighting with the kind of joy reserved for meeting musical heroes. She had been following Sarah's career online, watching performance videos, and reading interviews about life in a major symphony orchestra. Ms. Chen, thank you so much for lending me your violin. I practiced on it every day until we found a replacement, and it taught me so much about what a really good instrument can do. Sarah smiled, settling into the wingback chair where my mother had sat during that devastating Sunday morning. Please call me Sarah, and I'm glad the violin served you well. Elena tells me you've had some wonderful opportunities come from that audition. Sophie's excitement was infectious, as she described her acceptance letters, scholarship offers, and the upcoming summer program with the National Youth Orchestra. The 15-year-old who had been crushed by family betrayal 3 weeks earlier had transformed into a confident young artist who spoke knowledgeably about career trajectories and educational opportunities. The hardest part is choosing between programs, Sophie said. Curtis has an incredible faculty, but Juilliard has more performance opportunities in New York. And New England Conservatory has this amazing chamber music program that could really develop my ensemble skills. All excellent choices, Sarah said. But you don't have to decide immediately. You have time to visit campuses, meet faculty, see which environment feels right for your personality and learning style. I watched this conversation with wonder and gratitude. 3 weeks ago, Sophie's musical future had seemed impossible. Now she was discussing the relative merits of the world's most prestigious conservatories, like someone who belonged in those conversations. Sarah, Sophie said, her tone shifting to something more serious. Can I ask you about dealing with family pressure? I mean, even though things worked out with the scholarship situation, some family members still think I'm making a mistake. Sarah set down her coffee cup and looked directly at Sophie. Family opinions can be the most difficult obstacles for young musicians to navigate. People who love you often have the most conservative advice because they want to protect you from disappointment or financial struggle. But how do you know if you're being realistic or just stubborn? You audition at the Kennedy Center and get accepted to 3 conservatories with full scholarships, Sarah said with a smile. That's not stubborn dreaming. That's documented evidence of exceptional ability. Sophie nodded, though I could see lingering uncertainty in her expression. The wounds from Caroline's verbal attacks and my father's financial manipulation would take time to heal completely. There's something else, Sarah continued. The music world has changed significantly in the past decade. Musicians today have more diverse career opportunities than previous generations. Performance, teaching, composition, music therapy, arts administration, technology applications. A conservatory education opens doors to many paths, not just orchestral positions. My grandfather keeps saying that music is financially unstable. Your grandfather probably thinks of musicians as struggling artists playing in coffee shops for tips. That stereotype hasn't been accurate for decades. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed Sophie a banking app. This is my annual income from the Philadelphia Orchestra, plus private teaching and chamber music performances. It's more than most doctors earn, with better job security and definitely more interesting work. Sophie stared at the numbers on the screen, her eyes widening. I had to admit that I was surprised as well. The financial reality of Sarah's career contradicted every assumption my family had made about the economics of professional music. Of course, Sarah continued, success at that level requires exceptional dedication and continuous improvement. But Sophie, based on what I've heard today and what Elena has told me about your work ethic, you have what it takes to succeed at the highest levels. After Sarah left for her hotel that evening, Sophie and I sat in the living room where so much family drama had unfolded. The replacement violin rested in its case, a beautiful instrument, though lacking the history and sentimental value of the destroyed family heirloom. Sophie had adapted to it with characteristic determination, but I sometimes caught her looking wistful when she opened the case. Mom, Sophie said quietly, do you think great-grandmother Elsa would be proud of what I'm doing? The question caught me off guard, though it shouldn't have. Sophie had been carrying the weight of broken family connections, wondering whether pursuing her dreams meant abandoning her heritage. Sophie, your great-grandmother fled Nazi Germany with nothing but her violin. She came to America and continued playing, teaching, passing her love of music to her children and grandchildren. She would be absolutely thrilled to know that her great-granddaughter is carrying on that tradition at the highest levels. Even though Aunt Carolyn destroyed her violin, especially because of that, great-grandmother survived people who tried to destroy her culture, her identity, her art. She would understand that the music lives in you, not in any particular instrument. Sophie opened her violin case and lifted out the replacement instrument, a beautiful piece crafted by a contemporary luthier in Boston. She positioned it under her chin and began playing a melody I didn't recognize, something hauntingly beautiful that seemed to float through the room like a prayer. What is that piece? I asked when she finished. I'm composing it, Sophie said with a shy smile. It's called Elsa's Song. I wanted to honor her memory while also representing my own musical voice. The revelation took my breath away. Sophie wasn't just performing classical repertoire anymore. She was creating original music, finding her own artistic voice within the tradition she had inherited. When did you start composing? A few days after the audition, Sarah mentioned that many professional musicians compose as well as perform, and I started experimenting with melodic ideas. Sophie played a few more phrases of the emerging composition. This piece tells the story of leaving something behind but carrying its essence forward. Over the following weeks, our life settled into a new rhythm. Sophie's practice schedule intensified as she prepared for summer orchestra programs. I returned to my work at Morrison Financial Group, where colleagues treated me with a mixture of sympathy and admiration for standing up to such powerful family pressure. Rachel Kim had been promoted to senior associate, partly for her skilled handling of client concerns during my family crisis. The media attention faded quickly, replaced by other political scandals and cultural controversies. But the music world had taken notice of Sophie's story. Elena received calls from other conservatory faculty, asking about this young violinist who had overcome family sabotage to earn multiple scholarship offers. Sophie began receiving invitations to perform at music festivals and masterclasses, opportunities that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. My father reached out through email, formal messages that apologized for his actions while maintaining that his motivations had been protective rather than controlling. I responded politely but maintained boundaries. Forgiveness would take time, and trust would need to be rebuilt through actions rather than words. Caroline remained silent, though mutual friends reported that she was struggling with the public exposure of her behavior. Her social circle, composed largely of diplomatic families and political spouses, had distanced themselves from someone who had been revealed as capable of such vindictive destruction. She had gained the family control she thought she wanted, but at the cost of her reputation and relationships. In early February, Sophie came home from school with news that changed everything again. She had been selected for a special mentorship program with the Boston Symphony Orchestra, a summer intensive that would place her directly in the path of professional orchestra musicians and conductors. Mom, this could lead to a position after conservatory graduation. Principal players from BSO often become first-chair musicians in other major orchestras. Sophie's excitement was infectious, her eyes bright with possibilities that seemed to expand daily. Are you sure this is what you want? Professional orchestra life is demanding, lots of travel and pressure. Sophie looked at me with the kind of patient expression that teenagers reserve for parents who ask obvious questions. Mom, I've wanted this since I was 8 years old. Everything we've been through, all the family drama, and destroyed violins and stolen money, it was all leading to this moment. She was right. The crisis that had seemed so devastating in December had actually accelerated her musical development, forcing her to claim ownership of her dreams in ways that might not have happened under easier circumstances. That evening, I called Elena Rodriguez to share Sophie's news about the BSO mentorship. I'm not surprised, Elena said. Word travels fast in the classical music community. Sophie's story of overcoming family sabotage while maintaining artistic excellence has made her something of a legend among music educators. A legend? She's 16 years old. Victoria, exceptional artists often face exceptional challenges. Sophie's ability to rise above family conflict while continuing to develop her musical skills demonstrates the kind of resilience that defines great performers. Elena paused. There's something else you should know. I've been contacted by a documentary filmmaker who wants to follow Sophie's conservatory journey. The film would explore how young artists navigate family expectations while pursuing artistic excellence. The idea of our private struggles becoming public entertainment made me uncomfortable, but I recognized the potential value of Sophie's story for other young artists facing similar family pressure. What does Sophie think about it? She's interested, but she wants your approval. The filmmaker would focus on the positive aspects: overcoming obstacles, finding mentors, building artistic community. It wouldn't sensationalize the family conflict. I promised to discuss it with Sophie, though I suspected I already knew her answer. She had found her voice during our family crisis, and seemed increasingly comfortable using that voice to help others. 6 months later, I sat in the audience at Tanglewood, watching Sophie perform with the Boston Symphony Orchestra's summer youth program. She had grown taller, more confident, more sophisticated in her musical interpretation. The destroyed family violin had been replaced not just by a different instrument, but by a deeper understanding of what it meant to be a musician. In the row behind me, I heard whispered conversations about the violin girl, whose family had tried to destroy her musical career. Sophie's story had become part of classical music folklore, an inspiring example of artistic resilience overcoming family dysfunction. As Sophie played the final movement of Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto, her bow dancing across the strings with technical precision and emotional depth that brought tears to my eyes, I realized that Caroline's destructive act had ultimately backfired completely. Instead of crushing Sophie's musical aspirations, it had freed her from the need for family approval and connected her with a community of musicians who understood and supported her artistic journey. The audience erupted in applause as Sophie finished her solo, the sound echoing across the Berkshire Mountains like a celebration of dreams that refused to be silenced. In that moment, surrounded by music lovers who appreciated what they had just witnessed, I understood that we had won something more valuable than family harmony or financial security. We had won Sophie's right to become herself. As the concert concluded and families began gathering their belongings, Sophie appeared at my side, still glowing with performance adrenaline and carrying the violin case that had become as familiar as an old friend. "Mom," she said, "I have something to tell you. The documentary filmmaker wants to end the film with a message about supporting young artists who face family opposition." She asked if I would say something directly to parents who might be watching. "What did you tell her?" Sophie smiled, the expression of someone who had found her purpose and wasn't afraid to share it with the world. "I told her I would say this: your children's dreams aren't your dreams to control. They're not your dreams to destroy. They're gifts that deserve protection, nurturing, and celebration. And sometimes the best thing you can do as a parent is simply get out of the way and let those dreams soar." As we walked toward the parking area, surrounded by the chatter of satisfied concertgoers and the distant sound of musicians packing their instruments, I realized that Sophie's message applied to more than artistic pursuits. It was about respecting the individual paths that children choose, about understanding that love sometimes means supporting choices you don't understand, about recognizing that the next generation might see possibilities that previous generations couldn't imagine. The destroyed violin had been irreplaceable, but what grew from its ashes was something even more valuable: a young woman who knew her own worth and wasn't afraid to defend it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.